Thank you so much, ladies. I was explaining the other day to someone about how Caroline does something, and I have joined her in this that you might find kind of strange, and that is to liken people to an ice cream and like to characterize people to what type of ice cream we would compare them to. And I don't mean by saying this is the type of ice cream flavor that I think they would like, but rather by saying this is the type of, or this is the flavor of ice cream that I think this person and their personality is like. And so, for example, Caroline might say, this person has, they're kind of like vanilla ice cream. Now, on the surface, that sounds like that might be not a compliment. But in truth, being vanilla ice cream is pretty awesome because vanilla ice cream goes with anything. Have you thought about that? I mean, it really does. What toppings don't go with vanilla ice cream? I've even had peanut butter and jelly in vanilla ice cream, and it's awesome. But you can put sprinkles and chocolate chips, and you can put Reese's Cups, and it goes with cake, it goes with pie, it goes with everything, doesn't it? Vanilla ice cream goes with everything. Mint chocolate chip, less so, right? I mean, how many of you have said, man, I've got some peach pie I would love. Man, a nice hot piece of peach pie and a good cold scoop of mint chocolate chip. That's like saying, man, I'd like to have a big old glass of orange juice and toothpaste. And there's nothing wrong with mint chocolate chip. Mint chocolate chip is good. And mint chocolate chip could go okay. It could go really well with chocolate cake. It just doesn't go well with everything. And that has been kind of helpful. In fact, that's been kind of a pleasant conversation for us over the years as we think about people or evaluate people, like what kind of ice cream are they? And maybe I have lost you for the rest of the time because you're like, Elsie, that's tartar sauce. It may be a strange thought to liken people to ice cream, but we do liken people to things, and I want you to understand this. As followers of Jesus, He has likened us to some things. Specifically, He has likened us, compared us to salt and light. He didn't compare us to ice cream, but He did compare us to salt and light. And we're thinking about this as part of a series that we began last week. And last week was kind of a setup for what we're going to be, where we're going to be spending our time in the coming week. And that's in the Sermon on the Mount, in a series called Kingdom Logic. And what we're thinking about, and what I said last week is this, that we are, it's 2024, it's a big election year. We're thinking about and getting ready to be inundated with all sorts of election ads, and there's very much this sense in which we are experiencing much division and contention with respect to our culture and political ideologies and worldviews and all of this stuff that we are on the receiving end in terms of just the torrent of ideas and ideologies. How is it that we are to think through these things? How is it that we are to operate? And how is it that we are to navigate these things, not simply as an individual, not merely as families, not merely as people who live here as Americans, but more specifically as somebody that's a follower of Christ, who is a child of God, who is a kingdom citizen. That's what we're called to as followers of Jesus, is to be thinking differently. It is a different type of logic. Kingdom logic. That's what we're going to be thinking about in the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the things that early on Jesus does in this message, though, is to compare those that are kingdom citizens, those that are His followers, to salt and light. And so, what was that for? What did Jesus mean when He likened us to salt and light? Look with me in your Bibles to that passage in Matthew chapter 5, starting with verse 13. Matthew 5, starting with verse 13, Jesus says this. And it is not a blanket statement. Everything that He says is specifically to those who are kingdom citizens, to those who are the followers of Jesus. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Why in the world did Jesus not compare us to ice cream? Why did he compare us to salt and light? Well, it's because he was trying to convey something. And when he did so, what did he mean? Well, as the salt, he was, I believe, meaning this: do not lose your distinctiveness. As the salt of the earth, do not lose your distinctiveness. Let's set this up first by paying attention to how this message opens. He opens with what we know as, and often are referred to as, the Beatitudes. And maybe as a kid, you were told these were called the Beatitudes, as if to say, these should be your attitudes. But ultimately, that word, beatitude, comes from the word that, as this passage was translated from Greek and then into Latin. Long story short, beatitude came from that. That's where it comes from. Anyway, Jesus makes a series of statements that, in short, run very counterculture. In fact, they are not just in the first century, but even in a 21st century perspective, they don't make any sense. They run opposite what society was then and is saying today. So he says, for example, blessed are the humble. Now, before going further, let me say this. When Jesus says blessed, in fact, sometimes people insert the word happy, but that's not a good rendering of the word. In fact, I believe the word blessed doesn't quite capture the full measure of what Jesus is trying to say, because the word that he is using is this, or the idea is that he's conveying to be congratulated, to be praised is the one who does this. So to be congratulated are those who are humble, for they will inherit the earth. Well, that's counterculture, isn't it? Because what does our society say? You got to watch out for yourself. And if you don't get to the head of the line, and if you don't watch out for yourself, nobody else will. And the humble, they're going to be trampled on. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. They will be filled. Doesn't make any sense. Those who are merciful will be shown. If you're merciful, our society, our culture says that you're going to be trampled. You're going to be seen as a weakling. You're going to be seen as a pushover. And you're just going to get lost in the congestion and the busyness and the traffic of life. But Jesus says you are to be congratulated, to be praised for operating this way because of this simple fact. Living as a follower of Jesus is a life where we are called very simply to live very differently. We are called to live by very different standards because we are following, not culture, we're following Jesus. He is headed in a different direction, and he has called us to very different and far higher standards. As a result, we should, out of the gate, understand that the life that we are living is, by definition, counterculture. People thought back in the 60s that peace, love, and anti-war, that was the counterculture. No, following Jesus is counterculture. It always has been, and it always will be. And Jesus says you are to be congratulated for operating in this way. And he says you're going to experience pushback. We talked about that last week, and he says in verse 11, when they insult you, when they persecute you, when they falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me, this type of thing is going to come. All right, he said all of that in the opening 12 verses of this chapter, of this message. Finally, he says this, and he starts with a metaphor. Now, what's a metaphor? A metaphor is a word picture. It's an illustration. And he says to those who are his followers, to kingdom citizens, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. Now, let me say out of the gate, not going to bore you with the details of what likely many of you, because these are not unfamiliar words, likely many of you have spent many years or many sessions, whether in Sunday school or Bible study or other messages, thinking about all the specifics with respect to salt and its use in particular in the first century, and how it was that it was in the absence of refrigeration. It was the way that you would preserve meat. It was then and is today. It is the way that we make French fries and eggs taste better, right? And what else is it good on? Well, some of you, everything. I mean, you're like, you clearly have a problem. But anyway, Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. With respect to this, what I believe Jesus is saying, and again, this is a metaphor. It's a word picture. It's an illustration. And as salt was preservative, as salt added flavor, as it added benefit, I believe, in short, among other things, he is conveying that the presence of his followers in society and culture preserves culture and society, and it adds great benefit. Hopefully you're aware of the fact that things are crazy right now. And as bad as the world is, and as troubled as the world is, and as troubled as it always has been, it would have at any and every point in history been markedly worse were there not kingdom citizens in it. At a very basic level, think, for example, about this. How many Muslim hospitals have you seen? How many Jehovah's Witness hospitals have you seen? How many atheist hospitals have ever been erected? But how many hospitals with crosses on them? You want to go to Baptist Hospital? You want to go to Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte? Why is this the case? It's because of the people of God operating and having a preservative effect in society and culture. Us just living out as kingdom citizens have a positive benefit. Not only with respect to the healthcare system, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, the educational system has vastly benefited because of the presence of believers. We have always been advocates of learning, because ultimately truth is not subjective. Truth is God's truth, because Jesus said, I am the truth. And we shouldn't be afraid of education. We ought to celebrate it, because truth is objective and truth is found in Jesus. And it is the case. If you look even in this country's history, unfortunately, they are bastions of godlessness and pagan virtue. But Harvard, Princeton, Yale, why were they started? Who started them? Christians started them. Why is that the case? It's because kingdom citizens living as followers of Jesus have a real and meaningful and positive benefit and attribute throughout the course of history and even to this day in culture. Why? Because Jesus said it was the case. You are the salt of the earth. And as salt has preservative benefit, as it has beneficial additive benefit, so too do we have this benefit in our society and culture. Now, that being said, I don't want to bore you with the details about the complexity of salt, and there is a great deal that has been written by commentators and even by those in science with respect to Jesus's statement about salt losing its flavor, because some say, well, it's sodium, or salt is sodium chloride, and you can't technically blah 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 blah. Metaphors are illustrations, and by definition, they are nothing more and nothing less. Don't push them further than they are meant to be. Jesus wasn't actually saying, you are salt. It's a word picture. That doesn't mean that I'm more sugar. Make sure Elsie heard that. Don't press an illustration too far. What I believe, though, is that Jesus, beyond everything I've just said, is seeking to communicate is this. And it has to do with this statement where he says, if salt loses its taste, because it's like, well, can salt actually lose its taste? Can it be made salty? Pay attention to this statement. He says, it's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. I believe the thrust, the real weight of what Jesus is seeking to communicate when he's likening us to salt is this. It has everything to do with the word distinctiveness. Distinctiveness. And he intends for me, for you, for us to maintain our distinctiveness as kingdom citizens, as his followers. Because the more it is that we become like culture, the more it is that we follow the drift of culture, the less benefit we provide, the more it is that we are like them, the less preserving effect, the less benefit that we add. Now, I hate to keep kicking this can, but it's a good, clear example. When you pay attention to what has been happening to some of the mainline Protestant churches in the United States, whether it is the United Methodist Church, whether it's PCUSA, pick any of them, historically in recent decades or even in the most recent past, what has gone on? They have been deciding intentionally, we want to look with respect to our beliefs exactly like culture. We want to align our perspectives and our worldview, not to Scripture, but to culture. And what happens? They lose their distinctiveness. Consequently, people are like, well, so I can think about human sexuality just like everybody else. I can think about money just like culture. My relationships I can think about just like culture. Family I can think about just like culture. What do I need the church for? If the church loses its distinctiveness, of what use is it? And that's why so many are abandoning it. Because it has been increasingly deciding we want to look like everything that's around us. And so Jesus says, listen, what I have called you to is counterculture living. And you are the salt of the earth, and you must maintain that distinctiveness because you have a preserving benefit, and you have a beneficial impact on society and culture. But when you abandon that, it's of no use. It's not worth having. And culture is not going to be beating down your doors to try to join you because you're just like them. You're of no use. At our house, we use a lot of Texas Pete. I don't know about you, but we use a lot of it. In fact, for the longest time, we would buy it at Sam's by the gallon. And I would write a date on it when we would get it. So just out of curiosity to see how long we would, a little less than 9 months is how long it takes us to go through a gallon of Texas Pete. And so, but you don't really want to have a gallon of Texas Pete on your table, right? Because then, I don't know, you look like white trash. And so, is that a theological term? I think so. Anyway, so I'd gotten these little plastic squeeze bottles, and so we'd fill those up, and that would sit on the dining room table, so we looked a little more classy. And one of the things that we noticed, and like we would go through them with some frequency, but this is one of the things that we noticed. By the time you get to the bottom of the squeeze bottle, and then you would pour more in there, that fresh batch sure tasted awfully good. So much better. In fact, what went out was the color kind of a carrot. And then what I poured in looks like a fire truck. And so finally what we've decided is this. We're going to quit buying Texas Pete in the gallon and quit putting it in that little cheap squeeze bottle. Why? Because that cheap little squeeze bottle apparently doesn't keep out enough air, and the stuff, it loses its flavor. It loses its flavor. And so even though it costs more, we're just going to buy it in the glass bottles. And we're going to have the high class bottles on our table so that our Texas Pete tastes like Texas Pete. In short, what I'm saying is this. We are seeking with our hot sauce to guard our influence. Why? Because we want our hot sauce to operate like hot sauce. Jesus was saying to us, Michael speak, you are the Texas Pete of the world. You are the salt of the earth. And if we do not guard our distinctiveness, we're going to be just like the culture around us, and we will be of no use. We will be of no benefit. And what he has called us to is of too great importance. It is too great a calling. And the stakes are too high, and eternity is too long to blend in. And quit deciding that we want culture to like us. We want God to be pleased with us. And he has said, this is who you are, and I want you to act like it. I'm calling you the salt of the earth, and as such, do not lose your distinctiveness. Beyond that, he says this, as the light of the world, because he says this, as the light, make sure you identify the source. As the light, make sure you identify the source. Beginning in verse 14, Jesus switches metaphor, and he says, you are the light of the world. And then he says, a city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. And many times I think what he's describing here gets lost, and people are like, well, you can't hide a city that's on a hill because you can see it. What I believe he's talking about has everything to do with light. And when you have more light together, what happens? You can see it. Now, even in the first century, whether it was an oil lamp, whether it was a torch, whether it was campfires, whatever it is, the more light that is gathered, that is concentrated in an area, the more that you're going to be able to see it, and the further the distance it is that you're able to identify it from. And so he's saying that you're the light of the world, a city situated on a hill. He's talking about the collective influence that we can have together, those that are representing him, that we become identifiable. And then he says, no one takes a lamp. So if you've got an oil lamp, first century, you've got a candle, whatever it is. He says, you're not going to take that and in your home, you're not going to say, well, let's see. I have company over and we want to be able to sit around and talk afterwards. So let me set that over here behind this speaker and then we'll be able to talk. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to find a place of prominence that's in the absence of distraction, the absence of obstruction, and you're going to try to seek to elevate it so that you could maximize the output. And so, in many ways, I believe this is following up on what Jesus has described as he compared us to salt. With respect to light, and throughout the whole of Scripture, darkness is always associated with sin and evil and bad, and light is always associated with God and with holiness and virtue and that which is positive. And he says, you're the light of the world. And as he's called us to maintain our distinctiveness as salt, he's called us to maintain our brightness as light, because a little bit of light, even isolated light, pierces and removes darkness in an area. And the more light that you put in an area, the greater the impact. So we need to operate in ways where we are seeking to intentionally maximize our light output, not where we are seeking to look more like the darkness that's around us. As the light, do like the salt, maintain your distinctiveness. But pay attention to how this verse ends. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others. But then notice how he says, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. I think it is possible for individual believers, I think in particular for preachers, and especially the bigger the church and the higher profile the pastor is and the higher profile the church is, to lose sight of this. But letting your light shine is not an invitation to stand in increasing spotlight. Letting your light shine is not an invitation, is not a call to warrant or to pursue greater limelight. Because what's he saying that you should do? Let your light shine. Why? So that they may see your good works, period? Huh. So that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. What he's saying is that you're the light of the world, and the aim of you being the light of the world is not for people to pay attention to you as the light, but to pay attention to the source of the light. That they give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Well, what does this mean? What does this look like? Let me illustrate this way. Andrew's first job was at a local restaurant that is no longer in business. Maybe some of you went there. It was called Beach House Dogs. It was over on Gate City Boulevard. And it wasn't there very long. And it was just hamburgers, hot dogs, ice cream, that type of thing. And we went there a few times, really just to support him. And they were super nice to him. And he had a good experience working there. But I am not at all surprised that that business didn't make it. At all. At all. And at best, I thought their food was just okay. And part of the reason was this. It seemed very clear to me, all they're doing, this is not a cooking enterprise. This is a heating enterprise. All they're doing is heating. In fact, they didn't even hide it. This is no joke. So they had, when you went in there, they had their menu board where you put the little letters on it. So, hamburger, $3.55, Pepsi, whatever. So you had the prices on there. But then they added some new menu items. But they didn't go get some new letters and add those to that. What they did was, clearly they had bought this stuff at Sam's. I think these were buffalo chicken nuggets. They bought them at Sam's, and they cut the end of the box off that said Tyson Buffalo Chicken Nuggets and put a thumbtack and stuck it on the wall and said $4 for 6. Like, you're not even trying to, at least try to pretend like you made it. But you're even putting the packaging up there. You are clearly saying this is Tyson Nugget. This is Sam's product. This is not. We are grease droppers. We are fryers. That's all we are. Listen, I think if you're running a restaurant, that's bad for business. If you're thinking about running a business, a restaurant, don't do that. But let me say this: if you are following Jesus, that's great business. That's perfect operation. Because he's not interested at all in making Michael's star rise. He's not interested in making a big deal out of Gate City. He's not interested in making a big deal out of you. He's interested in making a big deal out of him. Do you know why? I can't change somebody's life. You can't change somebody's life. This church can't change somebody's life. But Jesus can. If we don't act as kingdom citizens, like kingdom citizens, we're the salt. We're the light. Who's going to do it? He compared us to this because he wants us to maintain our distinctiveness and because he wants us to point people to the source. That's how kingdom citizens operate. Will you bow your heads with me?